What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video, as you can no doubt tell from the thumbnail or the title of the video, we're going to be talking about the Fallen Heroes in this video. Now this video is pretty much the same as some of the other analysis or pull videos, but it is going to be in more detail since we have the stats with the associated characters, and it is a Fallen banner, which means there's a lot to talk about. It's also not Fed Pass Spark exclusive, so I feel like if you're still on the fence about some of these characters, you don't know where they stand, their power level and such, or do you really need them, then hopefully with both my opinion and of course some of the communities, you might be able to come to a decision on how useful these may or may not be to you. Each and every one of these characters is worth discussing, and that's why I'll put in the extra effort to get you guys in the know-how about these characters and whether you should skip or maybe commit something here. So expect me to go through all these heroes, go through the community posts, some sample builds, and by the end of it, I hope you learned something. If you have anything you want to add to this video or share with the community, then feel free to drop it in the comments, as that will help quite a few people out, I'm sure, and formulate a grander, bigger picture as to what these units mean to us. Now, before I jump into the video itself, I'm going to go through the beginning spiel here to just show you guys some things that are important to the growth and sustainability of the channel. First of all, if you've been noticing at the end of the videos, I've had splash screens that just literally thank the people who support this content. So I just wanted to give you a visual on it. If you've never visited the Patreon page, then this is basically what it looks like. And if you wanted to get some value and give back to what I do, then maybe just go check it out and consider sponsoring the content effectively. Some useful stuff here is weekly private streams on Discord, AR defense theory crafting, Summoner Duels tips, just a lot of communication, talking back and forth that isn't really covered in these type of videos, and of course the monthly unit review videos. Or if you just want a chill community to talk to with just mature and no strings attached, then maybe just go check that out. That's the first thing. If you wanted to get something else and get the actual teacher experience, as for those of you that don't know, I am a real life teacher. I also am on Medify giving away, I'm not giving away, but I do provide coaching sessions there, which is pretty much the teaching learning experience. So again, these links are in the description below, and this is not a sponsored channel by any means. So of course, I'm just telling you what I have to offer, and that means you can check the description below to get some value for yourself. Anyways, folks, I'm going to start off by just talking about the banner itself, and then we'll jump into some builds and, of course, what every character can accomplish here. Now, if I was to summarize this banner as easily as I can, I would like to relate it to like the CYL banners. Fallen banners are usually quite overhyped or talked about quite a bit, but you got to realize that a lot of Fallen heroes come back on many banners. They're not seasonal, they'll show up as pity breaks, show up on future banners, whether that's skill banners, legendary banners, mythic banners, the Twitter revote banner. There's a lot of cases where these units will just come back, whether it's because you want them or because you don't want them. So in terms of availability, they come back quite a few times. I feel even Fallen Edelgard showed up at least like 4 times between her release and then I believe around Hero Rises. So give that some perspective. This is not a case of urgency, and therefore summoning because of FOMO, because you feel like you're going to miss out, is not the case here, and you shouldn't rush to make a decision. If you already have, then I'm sure you just really like these characters. But realistically, these are not seasonal, they're not that limited, they'll come back, you'll get them eventually, if you want them, but sometimes even if you don't. Another thing to point out is the power level of these units is kind of subjective, I think, based on the barracks. This year's Fallen Heroes has 2 notable support units in the form of Lilith and Ninian, and that kind of makes them different than the past Fallen banners. I feel like the past Fallen banners, we kind of had just really strong carry type units or strong utility, something like that, you know, like Fallen Ike or Fallen Edelgard or Fallen Leon, just these really like powerhouse type units, whereas this year we actually have some supportive type stuff, with Lilith providing null follow-up, and of course her teleportation type of ally support stuff. Ninian gives a guard effect like Triandra, gets extra movement for dragons, and a kind of like breath or world breaker effect. So the 2 carries of this banner are pretty much Gustav and Rhea, whereas the supports are Ninian and Lilith. This makes this banner different than the past iterations, but also potentially more appealing depending on your barracks scenario and what carries you choose to use. For those of you that really like player phase strategies, or you use a tank that doesn't use null follow-up, might be using auto doubles, for example, whether that's just some sort of like QR type effect or whatnot, then someone like Lilith could be really appealing. Or for dragons, and somebody like Ninian could be really great because you'll add extra mobility and, of course, the guard effect. So this is where subjectiveness comes to the point, and if you have those type of barracks, then this sort of stuff will be very appealing for you, at least in some regard. But with that being said, I want to actually go through them one by one, give you some builds, and go over their specifics as to why you may or may not want to summon for them. I'll start off with Gustav, who honestly is likely the least appealing of this banner. In terms of fodder, the Smoke 4 skills are interesting. Attack Smoke and Speed Smoke 4 are not limited. They're actually can be used by anyone except staves or healers. So rest in peace, healer fans, I feel for you. The Smoke 4s are interesting because it creates this like tank dynamic that is now applicable to provide, let's say, dodge, speed, damage reduction to any unit, including flyers who may not have easily had as much access to it, or even calves or something like that, where they were more limited to refines. However, the smoke application could be a bit inconsistent, as it does at least require you to engage on the enemy to apply those sort of effects. So yeah, let's start with Gustav here. With Gustav, I'd say he's, again, probably the most boring of this batch, and the reason for it is just because there's not really much going on here. This guy is, as expected, dumping some of his speed to have high attack, defense, and res, and he's pretty much like, I would say, an Odor. Like, just if you liked or use Odor, then you're gonna probably appreciate Gustav in some manner, especially if you miss the presence of Odor on Dark Season. I really feel this doesn't apply to many people, but he will be a headache to deal with if you're playing AR offense and you run into Gustav, because he is pretty much very bulky. He has a acceleration effect, he has a slaying weapon, he has a guaranteed follow-up as long as, it has like a brash assault effect as long as the foe can counter him. So generally speaking, he's gonna just be obnoxious, but not necessarily meta defining in any way. If you are a Gustav fan, then you can definitely find some use for him. He's gonna be somewhat like an Odor on AR defense. That's probably one of his best positions, but realistically there's not more to it. In terms of his kit though, it is pretty nice to consider maybe using him as a tank. If you wanted a Cav green tank, then Gustav here is actually pretty solid for that role, as he comes with just a lot of good stuff in his weapon, and even his base kit kind of pushes this idea. So having slaying, having just a bunch of stats, having guard, having special acceleration, and then these auto doubles plus denying auto doubles through the attack smoke 4 that he has just makes him really great to pair up with a far save. But I'd say that's about as much as you'll get out of him. He's really the most boring of this batch of fallen heroes, and you'd kind of just force yourself to use him rather than he's gonna change the game in any real way for you. Let's move on to Lilith, where we're gonna talk about more interesting fallen heroes of this banner. So with Lilith, she's similar to her other form, the non-fallen form, but this one is definitely better. Despite there being a color contrast, where this one is red and the other one was blue, I would definitively say this one is better, but keep in mind that the other version of Lilith will eventually get a weapon refine, which may put her on par or potentially even better. There's a lot of benefits to this Lilith compared to the other one, which is that she can actually move within 2 spaces as opposed to 1 space anywhere on the map to a support partner. That is a insanely good effect. I don't usually say stuff like insanely good, but it is definitively very good, because this creates these really great mobility scenarios or support scenarios, or potentially like a Gale Force follow-up type scenario, which is what I'm showcasing in the builds here. I'm not even showcasing some of the other stuff that she could be used. I could see potential for her in stuff like Summoner Duels, following up on another unit as long as it's surviving or tanky. I could see her actually being used as a carry, as she does give herself null follow-up as well, which is still pretty unique to a lot of flyers. But I'm gonna put her in the roles that I see best, which are as a Gale Force type follow-up unit or null follow-up support for just anyone else, kind of like what you would do with Male Corrin, but rather than that, you're doing null follow-ups. So with stats, she's heavy on attack and speed, which means if you stack her attack and speed through the use of life and death, then she could potentially soak something like a Bright Shrine. With the no follow-up support type build, give her like a link skill, maybe pair her up with a dragon who otherwise doesn't have access to no follow-up. So think like, let's say, Legendary Tiki without Savvy Fighter. You're going to have this really great unit who's going to be able to jump in front or behind Tiki, use shoves, or just snipe certain units. But either way, no follow-up being given to another unit without even a condition other than ally support. Like Legendary Male Byleth has this, but he at least has that speed condition for it to work. Isn't really solid effect for a support unit. But that's not the only way I would suggest potentially using her, which is honestly with Gale Force follow-up. Despite Lilith not being able to use Gale Force because she's a dragon, you can give her Near Trace and then act in a way where she's going to snipe a unit because she teleported in front of one of her ally support friend, and then Near Trace gives, or just the near versions of Trace, give remaining +1. So they always give one move in Canto, which means if you're doing a Gale Force execution, you snipe a unit and then likely take its position to block off or trap a ranged unit. This is a very common strategy used with Gale Force, and the beauty of this is you don't actually need her ally supported partner to be below 50%. So this is really good because you're not constrained to HP conditions or trying to rely on the enemy to recoil or fury recoil or anything like that. She's just gonna clean, jump in, get into position. You don't have to meet any sort of heavy blade checks and work really well to trap units. I use Regan in a similar fashion, but even Regan has Wings of Mercy setups, whereas Lilith just doesn't care about this. It's unfortunate we don't have any form of like a res trace, because probably an SR res trace, near trace, or AR near trace would be pretty good. But it's not totally useless because lowering defense can still be pretty good for the adaptive damage scenarios where Lilith attacks into range units. Either way, as a one-off and for a lot of fun, Lilith is going to actually provide this sort of fun and combination of both being a great support for tank units, but also for player phase strategies that she can just teleport all over the map and create some havoc that way. Let's talk about Ninian next. Now, Ninian is still interesting and definitely cool as a support unit, but she doesn't really require you to reinvent the wheel here to make use of her. To be honest, just like Lilith as a one-off, Ninian is going to be quite impactful, whether that's in air defense or potentially air offense or summoner duels. Now, I haven't mentioned this, but you'll see in my builds that I combine air offense with summoner duels because I think there's a lot of overlap between unit builds that you'd use in air offense and summoner duels. I'd never suggest strictly investing into summoner duels, as the rewards you get from summoner duels don't really pay you back quite well. You could rank like rank top 10k or top 20k compared to someone who's like top 100, and you're honestly not losing out on the reward differences. It's literally less than like 10% in flowers or codes. It's really the amount of effort to get up there versus the effort of just coasting is very small. You should play something like Summoner Duels as a for fun type thing and not try to like be super competitive or at least investing into it unless you really only play that mode and that's the only thing you get out of hero. So when I showcase these builds, I'm trying to create some overlap so you don't like necessarily invest strictly for one mode, as it's just not really worth it. And of course you can do it, you don't have to listen to me, but that's just my own experience here, and just looking at the reward tiers, that's how it is. So with Ninian, her stat spread is what we kind of expected: high HP, low attack, high speed, and a favor towards res over defense. Having low attack as a dancer can be both a good and a bad thing. The bad thing is, of course, she poses no threat, and something like air defense, she's not really going to kill or provide any presence on your team besides her dance and supportive capabilities. If she has an offensive stat, then she might end up choosing to attack rather than dance, as there's a 5 damage AI rule for dance and assist. So again, it's kind of like a pro and a con. I do feel like threatening dancers are more effective nowadays than those that like try to lower their attack, just because having every unit in some form contribute to your defense, for example, is pretty good. And even in something like Summoner Duels, having Legendary Azura with her TA weapon and just being able to, let's say, snipe dual Crom is a great, well, it's a great counter. So this is why I do think just like these low attacks aren't necessarily always good, but they can be depending on how your team runs and whether someone like Ninian will just hit an enemy unit rather than not, or dance rather. Okay, so on air defense, she's kind of replicating a strategy that Triandra does, which is kind of applying a guard effect and some debuffs. This is unique for Anima, as Triandra was already doing this on Dark Season, but now Ninian can do this on Anima Season. And actually, I feel like guard is a very, very, very good defense type effect to have on a team, whether that's Ruse or now this breath slash dance that Ninian can provide to a team. On top of that, her base kit pretty much is as good as it gets for just placing her on defense anyways. Odd Pulse Tie is great on Anima, as it's going to hit someone like Regan, or potentially Yuri, or potentially Ascended Fjorm. When you factor in her high HP, add in the Mythic Blessings for HP, you're going to have yourself this unit who's going to create an immediate impact. B-Dual Infantry 4 is actually just fine in the A slot, even though you may not use her for Arena. She can be used in Arena, actually, because she has a preference dance, preference sing, whatever you want to call it. So this means that if you did bring up Ninian to plus 10 with B-Dual Infantry 4, she can be used in that content, but B-Dual Infantry 4 is actually pretty solid, as you want high HP and all the stats it gives anyways, combined with Odd Pulse Tie or Infantry Pulse to pretty much support your team on defense. A pretty solid unit to use on defense, whether you use dragons or not, but if you do use dragons, those dragons will also benefit from the kind of breath world breaker effect, but also the extra mobility. This can also be pretty relevant to something like Niffle or Moosebell, who can become from 3 move calves to 4 move calves, and all of a sudden you have these like Sigurd, legendary Sigurd clones on your team. So there's a lot of intricacies that I can appreciate from Ninian being here. Finally, Dragon Enhancer type build for air offense or Summoner Duels. This is going to be more team dependent, but it really does double down on Call to Flame, which again works really well with dragons, giving them extra mobility. So if you use, let's say, one of the slower turtle type armors, such as Ascended Dune, Tiki, Halloween Myrrh, whatever, they can really benefit from that extra mobility, especially if you're not using something like Ash or Rhydocatria for those orders effects. The extra mobility can definitely be a nice boon just to get yourself around, whether that's on air offense or Summoner Duels. Alright folks, moving on, the last covered unit on this banner is Rhea. Now there has been a lot of comparisons to someone like Fallen Edelgard, but I don't really think that's fair, as Rhea is just kind of designed completely differently than what I would consider Fallen Edelgard was. Now I still use my Fallen Edelgard to this day, but I use her in a Gale Force type comp, and that's about it, really. The thing that made Fallen Edelgard and still makes her quite unique is the fact that she has that extra action on her weapon, meaning she can move and attack multiple times. Well, not move, but attack multiple times in a turn. Combined with Gale Force, she's one of the few units in the game that can move 3 times independently of any other unit on her team. Meaning, with her weapon, she moves again. With Gale Force, and potentially either her preference B skill or a heavy blade, depending on how you use her, she moves again. So the initial attack, the weapon giving the extra action, and then a Gale Force for the third one. This means 3 attacks, which makes Edelgard quite unique as a player phase unit. Legendary Edelgard can do this too, although she has solo conditions which make her harder to use in my opinion. And finally, Summer Shida is another unit that can have up to 3 actions, which is her initial move, the Gale Force, and then her Harmo skill, if available, can give somebody else, like another dancer like Peony or Plumeria, another move, so that's 3. These are the only 3 characters in the game that can have 3 actions independently of any other influence, such as a dancer or something else that gives an action. So the thing with Rhea is she has no player phase. This is not a unit with a player phase, and therefore I can't really compare her to someone like Fallen Edelgard. Despite them obviously both being colorless armors, that's about as much of the comparison we get here. Rhea is still fairly min-max, dumping her speed to get the whole kind of high attack, defense, and res scenario. However, a lot of her gameplay is more enemy phase oriented rather than player phase oriented. She comes with near save, and honestly she comes with a kit that you don't even need to change, and I feel relies on enemy phase one-shots rather than trying to player phase bulldoze the same way Fallen Edelgard does. So to summarize the weapon again, it pretty much is very res heavy, very res reliant. This means that a res IV will be really good, but also an attack IV could be pretty good as well, depending on what you want to stack or what sort of mythics you have, where her defense and res end up being. Either way, res will be pretty good. My biggest issue with Rhea herself is her susceptibility to DR piercing type effects, such as Deadeye and Lethality. These type of effects are absolutely going to destroy her, unfortunately. She's going to badly lose to Duochrome. She's going to basically lose to every version of Lethality unit, and other units as well, such as, I believe, Legendary Male Byleth and Sublime Heaven are just going to absolutely destroy her. Despite how much res or defense she might stack, she's just going to get obliterated by these units because her B skill doesn't do anything against those characters. The counter and the most effective way that people have gone around these DR piercing type specials has been Hardy Fighter. Hardy Fighter combined with Aegis or Sacred Cowl has been the answer to this because those specials don't pierce those defensive specials. The problem with that, of course, is that you sub out a very powerful B skill. This preference B skill is really good when it's not going to get completely countered by your prevalent super specials. So you could, and a build not shown here is you could technically sub out the preference B skill for Hardy Fighter, combine her with Aegis or Sacred Cowl, depending on what you want to do. Run something like Deflect Magic, and then aim to try to just one-shot everyone using something like Glimmer and her weapon. Yes, her weapon does end up dealing extra damage based on the enemy's res, so it kind of has like a built-in Luna somewhat, or she just hits adaptive damage and hits really hard on someone's maybe low res stat, and then has some extra damage on top of that. She has her built-in Warrior Fighter, and Slaying are all great. She's not a bad unit by any means, despite everything I've said. I do think she's actually quite powerful and can work as both a near save on base kit or far save, just bumping up her res to try to make use of the B skill. But if you don't bump up her res, then maybe using an attack IV with Hardy Fighter swapped out on that B skill, we'll see more consistency for sure. Either way, I don't really want to push the idea of something like Rhea or Gustav on this banner. I think they're just good units, but no one here is like, oh my god, the game's about to change. Lilith and Ninian, definitely the most interesting of this pack, without a doubt. The final thing I want to talk about, of course, is the community's response to this banner. And you'll actually see right here on the poll results to my left that we have quite a few of you sparking here, and I'm curious as well. I've read the comments on where you stand. It seems a lot of you are going into this banner because you just like these characters. That makes a lot of sense. Feel free to affirm it, of course, in the comments again if my rationale reasoning for these votes is as they are. I'm assuming most of you just like these characters and that's why you want to get them. The spark is there, it's not FetPass exclusive, and I completely understand. However, again, be careful when you're chasing meta, and it's not really going to be this banner where that happens to be the case. Your orbs may better well be spent in something like a duo hero like Duochrome or Dual Dagger for Arena and AR, of course, and mythics in general, mythic merges, or just legendary merges for tons of bonus unit availability. And of course, a high merge legendary will give you an advantage in Arena and most Coliseum modes in general. So yeah, folks, let's go over some comments that I saw that I want to showcase from here. The first comment here by Richard Lee says, I intend to get a copy of Rhea for collection purposes. Although it'll go much further than Spark, I've been saving for the CWL banner, and while my orb count is good, I'm concerned there'll be more 3-house banners nearer to summer to tempt me. So yeah, as I suspected, I do feel like a lot of you guys likely just really like these characters. They're really popular, and therefore will be tempted to spend some of your orb stash. Completely makes sense. Another comment by Clara Felix says, I sparked a Medusa already, so I'm not sparking now, since I judge a new defense mythic will be more valuable than anything that came in this Fallen banner. That's a solid assumption. I've never really felt too tempted by Fallen banners. I believe Fallen Edelgard was about as close as it got for me and being very impactful, but that's just because of her player phase mechanics and less about her tankiness. Now that we have Rhea here, tankiness not so appealing. There's plenty of really good tanks in the game already, so Rhea doesn't really stand out for me. But like I said, Mythics seems right, at least in terms of competitive and meta type responses, with Medusa of course being pretty solid. Despite how awesome those new C skills are, I still don't regret the decision despite how tempted I am to get them. So yeah, the smoke skills might be something I haven't mentioned here, but they are potentially really good fodder, and maybe that's why some of you are sparking to pick up a smoke skill and then give it to another of your carry or favorite units. If that is the case, then just confirm again in the comments below. I'd love to see what you guys are doing in this banner. Okay, last comment here by Poke Emblem says, I'm a day one player, never felt like I needed to summon Unfallen banners, 3 summons on green for attack smoke, and move on. I'm glad Rhea doesn't come with innate DC, but that won't stop people from building her to be far save anyway. It will be interesting if Hardy Fighter just replaces True Dragon Ball, which is exactly what I suspect might happen, as again, that weakness to stuff like that and lethality makes that B skill really weak. Smoke skills look cool though, looking forward to get those in the future. Absolutely. So the ability to just plop these smoke skills onto like so many good units will really open up build options. Alright folks, that basically covers today's video. Hopefully this analysis was thorough and I did put in as much effort as I could. Again, post video, I do like to thank my subscribers, and if you wanted to, you could always hit up Twitch as well to ask live questions, get some feedback on whatever you may need help with. Maybe take advantage of the coaching that I have to offer, which can bring you up to the top tiers, whether that's in AR or Summoner Duels or whatever you enjoy out of this game. You can always just sit down with me and we can have a blast. That's it for me. If you haven't already smashed the like button, then do so. I do see that, and it does make a difference. Thank you all. See you in the next one very soon. Love you all. Peace.